Many moons ago, before the advent of everything we deem familiar, a very wise man named Plato once said, "The measure of a man is what he does with power." Don't know if you've noticed, but we live in a very twisted world. And while I don't live my life in a pessimistic fashion, constantly thinking about the negatives, I couldn't help but consider the state of the world that we are in as I sat back and watched the US Senate grill those tech giants, the Zuckerbergs of the world, about the state of social media, which it really is in a state. And then also, when I accidentally found out on Reddit that friends of the channel, Meghan and Harry, have weighed in on the issue, of course, as they do, because, they hop on bandwagons, and have taken the opportunity to troll us. Now, normally, I would be commenting on whatever Meghan and Harry said. It would probably be the main topic of the video, and we'll move on. But today is not that day. Because let's face it, folks, this incessant pattern of behavior is not particular to Mr. and Mrs. Markle. All of this unabashed grandstanding and hypocritical preaching that they have been engaging in over the past few years is merely a symptom of a much bigger, deeper, and far more serious problem. But before I get ahead of myself and start talking about the bigger picture, I must read out this portion of Meghan and Harry's statement posted on their Archwell website late last week in conjunction with the US Senate hearings. Prince Harry and Meghan, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex and co-founders of the Archwell Foundation, said, "We applaud the bravery and determination of the thousands of parents around the country whose advocacy resulted in this hearing." They then go on to talk about how they spoke to parents and how they were there at the World Mental Health Festival in New York last October, where Meghan showed up dressed like she was going to an after-hours cocktail party and basically just sat there talking about themselves and how they're so lucky that their children are too young to suffer from the evils of social media. But I digress because we're getting to the spicy bit here. This is not the time to pass the buck of responsibility. It's the time to make necessary change at the source to keep our children safe. Do you see what I mean by they're trolling us, ladies and gentlemen? Pass the buck. I find it interesting that they were happy to pass the buck with the very incredibly serious allegations emanating from the whole African Park scandal and the Rangers, which, by the way, we have an entire podcast discussing that in detail. If you haven't seen that, I will link it up here. But all of you who know about it, you know just how dark and serious and twisted those allegations are. But that's fine to pass the buck. When it comes to children and online bullying, which, let's not forget, Meghan and Harry are connoisseurs of bullying, aren't they? With all the allegations emanating from past staff members and onlookers, authors who've written about it that haven't been sued. We all know how litigation happy Meghan and Harry are. And of course, that's without considering their Sussex squad, which obviously I have been subjected to their disgusting comments and behavior. So yeah, the irony is very real with this one. They've also thrown in the requisite glossy video showcasing them, and more them, with the grieving parents of dead children being used as props for their little play of humanitarianism that they're very poorly acting out. Because that's what this is to these types. It's just an act. Every time I see people like Meghan and Harry appearing at these events, and they're not the only ones, but we talk about them a lot on this channel, obviously, I just think, what do they know about said organization or field or topic of interest that they are now inserting themselves into? What do they know about the harms of online child bullying? They've already admitted, as I mentioned earlier, that they haven't experienced it with their own children because their children are too young. So why were they there, announced last minute, tacking on their Archwell Foundation name to this already established event, and sitting in on a panel alongside the US Surgeon General? I think we all know the answer, but I'll spell it out just in case. Because with their royal connections and their titles and their fame and fortune, they are perceived to have the ultimate currency: power. And that power gives them access. Access that, but for their titles and connections, they would never have dreamed of. Let's face it, society is fickle. And as a whole, there seems to be this belief that has permeated from the top to the rest of us that the rich and famous and influential are automatically, inherently more worthy, more valuable human beings than those of us who are deemed as nobodies. You even see it all over YouTube. I mean, I know I do. I get comments all the time. Who do you think you are? Who are you? i.e., you're not famous, so your word doesn't matter. Which I find to be really sad and really wasteful and really ironic, given that usually it's the nobodies, the ordinary people who come from varying backgrounds, all walks of life, who have interesting stories and backgrounds and careers and achievements, and they've worked hard to get to where they are without being given handouts, without using their titles and connections and nepotism. They have value to impart to the rest of us, and they have achievements and accomplishments that warrant applause, accolades, recognition. But then there's this gatekeeping thing happening at the same time, perpetrated by these elites, where you have to be somebody to get a seat at the table, as Meghan likes to say, but then you're never given a chance to be a somebody, and so you'll never get a seat at the table. I mean, speaking of Meghan, she herself knows this. Why else do you think she tried so hard to marry into the British royal family? And if your response is because she loved Prince Harry, then I'm gonna see you at the building myself. And Meghan, when she became part of this elite set, perpetuated this gatekeeping herself, rather than use her experiences, once upon a time when she was a commoner, when she was a nobody, and people just didn't want to give her opportunities. They didn't want to set her or put her on the world stage. She could have used that to then use her podcast to open it up to people who aren't rich and famous, but have accomplished amazing things and deserve to have their stories put out there. I mean, that's what they said they would do with their podcast initially, if you remember.
We created Archwell Audio to make sure that we can elevate voices that maybe aren't being heard and hear people's stories.
But of course, Meghan instead chose to only perpetuate that cycle of you have to be somebody to have a voice by choosing deliberately to only invite the rich and famous A-listers, elitist, powerful players, predominantly of Hollywood. But the problem is we as a society accept and perpetuate this toxic cycle ourselves, even though we don't benefit from it. We're not part of the elitist group. We're not given a seat at the table. And yet, because we're brainwashed, because we're influenced by these people with a platform, we continue the cycle and repeat the same things amongst our peers. You're not important enough. Who are you? You're not famous. Who do you think you are? Etc., etc., etc. Just simply accepting the status quo that has been dictated to us. Just like once upon a time, peasants accepted their lot in life because they believed that that was God's will, for them to be poor and miserable. Just as kings once believed that that was God's will, for them to be rich and powerful and prosperous. Now back to the question I was posing about Meghan and Harry's appearance at the World Mental Health Forum. And it's not the only one, by the way. We know that there are many rich and powerful and influential people who hold positions, senior positions in organizations or in industries, fields that they have zero credentials in. So they have no business being in a position of leadership or authority within those fields. And yet, we're seeing it happen time and time and time again. Why? Why, when there are probably people who are unknown, normal people, us normies, that are far more qualified, have spent years, decades, upskilling and educating ourselves in those particular fields, and who deserve to be placed at these senior positions, and who would know what to do with the powers and responsibilities afforded to those senior positions. And yet, once again, you're a nobody. You don't get a seat at the table. We've seen how the rich and powerful are given access to certain locations that they have really no business being in, such as when Meghan and Harry shut down the LA National Cemetery in 2020 so that they can parade across the graves of dead veterans for their own photo shoot, a publicity stunt. You think they would have been given permission to do that if they weren't Meghan Markle and Prince Harry, or, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex? Or how about when Meghan went to Uvalde? Would she have been given access with her whole filming crew in tow if she wasn't the Duchess of Sussex? Would she have been allowed to march with veterans? Something which I really find particularly disgusting given my military background. In shorts and flip-flops or sandals, like a drunk tourist, making an entire mockery, not only of the Invictus Games and the veterans, but of herself? You think some random tourist would have been allowed to do that? And let's go further, let's go deeper. What about Epstein and the things he has gotten away with for decades? You think that no one knew? Of course, everyone listening. These are rhetorical questions at this point. I'm not insulting your intelligence, but why do you think he was allowed to get away with so much? Even when he was indicted, he was convicted in the late 2000s. And he still went on doing his disgusting, dirty, illegal deeds because he was given permission to. He was allowed. He was too rich and powerful to say no to. And so they either, turned a blind eye or literally sat on and watched him do it, if not participated with him in the process. Because we know absolute power corrupts absolutely. The things that these people get up to. You've got Harvey Weinstein. For years, once again, everyone in Hollywood knew exactly what he was doing. You've got R. Kelly. Yes, three of these men ended up in prison. But after what? After decades of getting away with it? Because it's not just the outcome that matters. It's what was allowed to happen during that prolonged time, the lives that were destroyed. Why? Because they were rich and powerful and influential, and so they were given permission. The fact of the matter is, all of these elites are merely players in a game. And Meghan and Harry, I know, again, we like to talk about them a lot on this channel, but they are really small players at the end of the day. And this is a game that was set up by the elites for the elites, while the rest of us are merely pawns, existing to do their bidding until the day we die. I know it sounds depressing, but it's grounded in reality. So the game isn't just rigged. We all know it's rigged. It's broken. We've been brainwashed into thinking that we're living in the most peaceful and prosperous time in the history of humanity. And yet, can someone please tell me why people of my generation, the youth of today, will probably, a huge majority of us, never own a home? That simple, basic privilege, the bottom need, I suppose, in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, shelter, a home. And we can't afford it, not through our own fault, not through our own doing. Everyone knows that millennials, Gen Z, we are the most educated and most hardworking generation in a long time. No matter what the older generations say, it's fact. And yet, we don't even have the privilege of owning a house. Or if we do, at some point in the future, it will only be possible by basically sacrificing our well-being and dedicating an ungodly, unnatural, enormous number of hours of our life towards working hard in pursuit of that seemingly simple and basic goal. We're not asking for a lot here. And as long as the game is broken, which I believe it will be for a long time because of the powers that be, that vicious cycle of gatekeeping and stifling the masses while the elites get richer and richer and more powerful and amass all the capital in the world amongst them, or most of it, I should say. The likes of Meghan and Harry aren't going anywhere. You know, I always hear people say, why does the media cover them? Why do we talk about them? Why are they plastered all over the news? Because they've been given permission to do so. They've been given permission for their PR to sell us stories. You think any regular person can write to the Daily Mail and say, hey, can you post this? I mean, I don't know, actually, maybe if you pay them enough money, but they don't care because it's not going to attract clicks because you're a nobody. You know, people want to be around power. They want to be around more money, more influence so that they can have a taste of it themselves. And that's why Meghan and Harry and any other celebrity that you're sick of hearing about who are contributing nothing but negativity to the world aren't going anywhere. And that's why they feel comfortable trolling us online and telling us that they're the victims of bullying and that they're just looking out for the interests of children. They don't want to pass the buck when we all know that the exact opposite is true. But we can't do anything about it because we don't have a seat at the table. They say youth is wasted on the young. Well, I say power is wasted on the powerful. And that's it. Thanks for coming to my Pluto talk. I'm in assignment season. For those of you who don't know, I'm a masochist. I'm almost completing my second master's, and my brain, I'm doing advanced calculus, has officially turned into mush. So, rip brain. Pray for me. I need it.